So listeners, welcome back to the next episode of the podcast. I'm very pleased to have Lucy Werner here today. Lucy, it's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, David. Thanks for asking me and being patient whilst I took my time to get in the diary.
No problem. We had some major technical issues at the start of this today, so it was great to finally get things working here.
And I've never been so excited to hear David's voice in my life.
You're the first person ever. Okay, Lucy, we're going to start off the way we normally do with these episodes, and I'm just going to get you to tell me a little bit about yourself. So give me a bit of your background, your family, your recent history, all that sort of stuff. Just tell our listeners what they need to know about you right now.
So right this very second, I am sitting in rural France. I have 3 children under the age of 7. I have just been 1 year paid on Substack as of last week. And before that, I was running a PR and branding agency with the co-founder of my children. He left me, not in marriage, just in career, to take an in-house role. And before I ran my own agency, so I've been working for myself for 10 years. Before that, I have always worked for either big London PR agencies or ad agencies or innovation consultants. The last 10 years, I've just really specialized in small businesses and entrepreneurs and creatives. But I have used all my big agency background to apply to small business because I feel like why shouldn't somebody like you or I be able to access big agency thinking, even if we don't have that budget?
Amazing. And how did you end up in rural France then? What's the story there?
I guess the short version is my husband's French.
Okay, fair enough.
And I think it was a bit of a pivot like lots of people had in the pandemic. So we were walking out of our house in London, crossing our garden and going into our garden office. And I just thought if we're always going to be working from home, maybe there's a more affordable way to do this with a better view, nicer weather. I remember we went on holiday to the Isle of Wight. I was like, maybe we could live by the sea. And my husband he's from the French Riviera. We're going to live by the sea. It's not going to be in this country.
It's not the same thing, is it?
So lots of reasons, really. But I guess I really wanted my children to get the French. It felt like a good time to make the leap as any. I was turning 40. I had my 3rd child out here. So it was all that kind of big pivot, really, all at the same time.
Incredible. Yeah, France is amazing. My family, or some of my family members, lived in France for a long time and got to visit them a few times, and it was fantastic. I love going there. Can you speak French at all?
Badly. So I have French classes Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, and I'm now an advanced beginner.
Very good.
You could say I'm a beginner intermediate, maybe.
Okay. That's a million miles better than me, so well done. So let's say I want to talk more about solopreneurship. So you've mentioned there about working for yourself for the last 10 years. You have a quote on your Substack publication: I believe solopreneurs will leave the world a better place. Can you expand on that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us, particularly in the creative industry, typically tend to share some of the same politics without getting into too much detail. But I would much rather support the individual, support the independent person who's not ruled by big money, big corporates, big politics, because I feel like independently we can make this ripple effect. So if I can help 100,000 independent people make money in their own pockets who are then doing good in society, it makes me feel a bit better about making a rich conglomerate even richer. Try and get the equity spread out a bit more, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. I think small business and solo business is the way forward. I think it has been for a long time. I think we prop up a lot of the countries we live in, small business wise. So I think we should definitely get the most out of it ourselves as solopreneurs. And I want to ask you about Substack. We'll come back to solopreneurship as we talk here, but what drew you to Substack then? So how did you end up on this platform?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess before I came to Substack, I was actually trying out on Medium. I think I was on Medium for a few years. And then when I was pregnant, I set myself a challenge to just get 100 articles out just to test the waters. Some of it was for myself. Some of it, if you don't know Medium as a platform, it's a little bit like traditional PR land in that you can pitch to other publications. So I was just trying out what happened if I appeared on other publications and changed my style. And I already had a MailChimp list. I'd been building up my newsletter for 3 years before. So I'd been sending out a monthly free newsletter. And I was paying a lot of money on MailChimp to hold that list. When I knew I was going to be taking a bit of an extended maternity leave, And I just thought, oh, maybe there's a way I can combine the writing I was doing on Medium with my MailChimp list.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to a talk that Farah Store did on Substack. And just like, as the kid at school who got the pencil that says, say no to strangers. And I was like, okay, I'm going to follow that advice. Farah said, turn on paid straight away. And it was like a light bulb just went off in my head. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I did. And I told everybody that I was going to do it, that I was setting it up as a pilot price whilst I figured things out, that this is my maternity leave project, what I hope to achieve with it. I hit bestseller in a month. But you say that, you're like, oh yeah, wow. And you're like, but I had cultivated that list for 4 years.
Man.
So it's a 4-year, 1-month success story.
Yeah. But that's so important as well, because I think people don't realize sometimes that does take time to nurture your list and keep your audience warm and prepared to make that jump with you whenever the time comes.
Yeah, 100%. And also I had cultivated that list by bringing lots of people over from social media. And when I was writing my first books, I was giving out a free piece of advice every single day because I was running my agency. I wasn't selling anything. So I literally gave out free advice, free content, free talks, free workshops for a really long time before I actually then asked for any payment of any kind.
Yeah, and that probably built a really strong connection between you and your audience as well. And you mentioned social media. Is Instagram kind of your main social media platform?
Yeah, it is at the moment. So I'd say I can definitely see when I talk on Instagram, I can see the change in subscribers, or I can see when an article is shared a lot on my Instagram, I can see the ripple effect of views. So it's not a very scientific measurement. But even when I first brought the newsletter out, I sell on Instagram like every single day. And it might be, when I say selling, it's not like I'm always like, come and buy my newsletter. It might just be I'm sharing a reader win, or it might be I'm sharing what I'm writing about that week, or I'm sharing what I'm doing behind the scenes. But in some way, there is some promotion of the newsletter of some kind every single day on my Instagram. But LinkedIn's also a big one for me as well.
LinkedIn, yeah. And you're on TikTok as well, I noticed as well.
I know, but I haven't quite got to grips with it. And I am like, there's only a certain level. So I dip my toe in it, but the reach is better, but I don't feel like I have my audience there. So I'm always about trying to not spread yourself too thin. So I like to have what I call like a menu in every social media shop window. So I'm on for X as well, and Pinterest, but they're just sort of more there rather than actively using it.
Yeah, that's the same with me. I'm kind of there everywhere, but I very rarely use social media now that Substack's come along for me. How do you think, if someone is on social media and they've got a good audience on a platform, what's the best way to encourage people to become email subscribers from that platform, in your opinion?
Just ask for it. I mean, that's the bit that I think most British people hate. Like, I will ask people to come over. I will say, I want to hit 10,000 free readers. Please, can you come over? I'm trying to hit 10,000 free readers by this date. Or I guess it's not so much FOMO, but I will say, this month I'm talking about this. Today I'm talking about this. Today I've just shared that. I'm always sort of giving that feeling of this is what's there. So it's not always necessarily a direct please come and join my newsletter. There's always a sort of an incentive, I guess. And I feel like with newsletters, we're in such a unique place to be able to update all the time of what's happening and what's new and what our best read is. And so you've got micro launch moments all the time. So there's no excuse really to not be constantly sharing it.
Good point. I think it's the same in terms of like products. People need to see a product a certain number of times before they'll consider buying that product. And maybe it's the same with newsletters. They need to have that call to action a certain number of times on social media before they'll think, yeah, I am going to jump over now. I am missing out on something unless I join Lucy's mailing list on Substack. I'll say it already. What is the best thing about Substack right now? So you've been on there for a while, a lot longer than I have, and you've seen it go through the various changes. In terms of right now in 2024, what do you think is the best thing about the platform? If you're trying to sell it to somebody else and get them to come over, what would you tell them?
It's a very good question. I guess for me, I'm not like a big Substack aficionado. I think for certain people, it performs even better because there are and cliques on there, but I would actually be quite mindful of that. What I think is nice is in any social media platform, when it's in the early algorithm stages, there is more of a chance organically of being seen. But I would steer away from that, because I don't recommend going viral. I don't recommend just playing with somebody because they've got big numbers, because it doesn't mean you're going to get the audience you want. It doesn't mean your values are aligned. For me, the technology on Substack is changing all the time. Like, I don't really grow in Substack. I tend to bring my audience off. I think I'm quite an anomaly in terms of the Substack typical person. I do get maybe people coming over because other writers have recommended me, but they're not necessarily people who are paying for my Substack. The people who pay are people who've met me in real life or who've seen me at a workshop. For me personally, it's not about Substack as a platform. It's about using a tool or a software that serves you. I know lots of people who promote Medium over Substack or Patreon, or just having a blog on their own website and charging a membership independently. So, I think you've got to just pick what feels good. For me, it's very easy to use. It's very simple to do my branding and get information out of there.
You're primarily using it as like a newsletter platform, essentially, and you're bringing your audience from elsewhere to it. Yeah. That's cool, actually, because I think a lot of people, when they join Substack, kind of say, oh, social media is rubbish and everything needs to happen here at this point. Maybe I've been guilty of that myself in the past. I think it's cool to hear that people can still grow outside of Substack and bring people to it and use its newsletter functions. I've spoken to other people who are on TikTok, for instance, and they bring people from there to Substack. So it's cool to see that happen, actually, because I think we demonize social media a little bit sometimes. I know it's not what it used to be, but it's still a useful tool and can still play a big partner like writer ecosystem.
Look, for me, I get a bit sort of frustrated when I see people do down social media, because I'm like, are you paying to advertise on there? Are you paying to advertise on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn? So what on earth do they owe you? They don't owe you anything. You've voluntarily given them your data, and every single time you post, that is a free advert for your business. Historically, in the world I'm from, in PR, if you wanted to appear every single day in a newspaper or on a radio ad or a TV ad, you would have to spend thousands, and you'd have to test it to see if it works and people are following it. We have access to social media for free. Yeah, admittedly, the reach can be strangled sometimes, but still you're getting to advertise for free unless you pay for it. If you're paying for it and then you're still not getting the reach, then it becomes a different issue. But I've never heard anybody say, oh, I've paid to post an advert on Instagram or TikTok and Facebook and not get the reach. So when people are complaining against reach or algorithm, I'm like, but you're not paying to use that tool. So what does it owe you? You're actually getting to use it for free. You're the one who's got the benefit here.
That's a good point. You're just right, because and you're obviously fired up about that, because it's true. They are there as tools, and we do spend more time complaining about the free stuff that we have than actually learning how to use it to its full functionality. And yeah, I mean, I've used social media for years in terms of my business, and it kind of grew off the back of that in terms of especially Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And I think the frustration for me is seeing that reach reduce when it once was better, but it still is there for free, as you say.
Yeah. And like, they're a business at the end of the day.
Exactly. And yeah, so I want to talk about you again, let's say, because obviously you're here, so I want to talk to you. Tell me a bit more about yourself in terms of hype yourself on Substack, and in terms of what you offer people and what you're all about. What exactly can you do to help people if someone wants to learn how to hype themselves? What does that actually mean, and what does that look like for you?
So historically, my background is in PR. So historically, it's literally getting people into the newspapers originally. It's evolved over time. So it might be, I work with a lot of founders to get them booked as a keynote speaker, to teach workshops, to get on podcasts, to host their own events, to get brand deals. Everything that you do in the public eye is managing your relationship with the public. So even me being sat with you on this podcast now is PR for both of us. We are now positioned alongside each other for the greater good. Our names are associated together in the digital world. I always get people as an exercise to like Google themselves and see what comes up top. Go on DuckDuckGo, go on like a Google private view. And quite often we can actually control what is the first thing that's coming up, particularly if we have a keyword. So I quite often will say my handle is Lucy Werner PR, so that people are searching for me as Lucy Werner and PR, because unbelievably there are other Lucy Werners out there. So for me, it's condensing all of that agency experience I've got and the strategy and the creativity, and then giving it to you bite size. So I send out a weekly PR recipe to my paid subscribers, which is a prompt or a template or a resource, which is an idea for that week. So 1 week we might be looking at our LinkedIn banner, because for me that's like prime time PR real estate. The next week we might be looking at alternative ways that we could be recycling a previous email pitch. The next week we might be pitching for a podcast, all these sort of different things. And then I supplement that with what I call like a side serving of personal essays. So I will talk about my journey from agency owner to solopreneur, how I went from having multiple income streams to now predominantly making my income from writing. And then I have a free to read once a month, which is the Hype monthly newsletter, which was my original one. And then for freebies, I occasionally, every now and again, there'll be a topic that everybody asks me about. So it'll be like launching a book, or how to get in Christmas gift guides, or promoting your Substack. And I will just write an article, which is always called Borrow Everything I Know About. And I just write every single thing I know about that thing. And I do that as a freebie for everyone. The paid also get a monthly live with me. So it could be a Q&A, could be a topic that they've asked me about, or I'm bringing in a guest expert. Like, I love working with geeks in their niche. So I'm not anti people who've got huge followings, but I typically tend to work with people who don't care about followings, but are just really good in their areas of expertise. And I also create these directories of opportunities, because I think for a lot of my audience, they just don't have time to source podcasts or other newsletters to guest on, or which conferences are looking for guest speakers. So historically, that's been a quarterly directory. I'm now trialing out doing them as micro monthly ones, just to see how they go, because I was like, oh, it's great to get everything all at once, because that's what I like. But from testing my audience, they were like, oh, actually, just a few more often might be. So I try and question my audience a lot of what they want, what they don't want, and tweak the newsletter accordingly. So it's evolved. But the weekly recipes, I love it, because it could be a hard thing, it could be an easy thing, it might be something you do later, but I feel like it's just such an easy bite-sized little nudge that next to you being like, right, try this week, just try that. Because a lot of PR, it's about the consistency, and people think, oh, I need to talk about something else, or I need something new. It's like, no, it's just, it needs to become habitual. And you need to have fun doing it, right? If you hate how you're promoting yourself, you're not going to do it. So that's why I'm always sort of throwing different ideas at people as well. Try this, try this. And when it feels good and when it feels right, you're in such energy and such flow for it. And then your audience feels that on the other side as well. And I'm constantly saying to my audience, if you don't tell us what you're selling, we won't know what you sell. So you have to keep reminding us. And even today, like classic example, I've done the bare minimum for my third book, in part because it's slightly a recycled version of my first book. So it's not quite the same as I've written it from scratch, baby sort of thing. You know, it's had a lot of other work from other people. But I did a standalone email for it. I mentioned it 2 or 3 times in other emails. I've done maybe 3 or 4 social media posts. And when it came out today, so many of my audience were like, I had no idea you had a third book coming. And in my head, I'm like, I haven't done a lot of promo for it, but I did a bit.
You did some, yeah.
You know, so for me, it's like, yeah, you've always got to be promoting. I still promote my first book, which is called Hype Yourself. That was the first book I wrote. Just as hard now, 4 years later, as I did when it first came out. And I think people think you have this moment and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's not, it just isn't like that.
As someone who has published a book and has another book coming out very soon, what would you say are the best ways to promote a book that has been out for a while? So not just new books, but books that have been out for maybe a few years. How do you keep that momentum going?
I think you've got to find ways to have fun with it. So I do things like I take copies with me when I know I'm going to events and I'm going to meet influential people, and I hand them copies, and I try and maybe get somebody to video or photo me, like handing them a copy. I hide copies of mine in like co-working spaces or in hotels. I've got it, they're there behind me in the background. So when I'm on podcasts, I'm talking about it. So even if it's not the crux of what we've spoken about today, I have now done a plug for both of my books. Inadvertently, I've done a plug for all 3 books today. Yeah. So yeah, I will do anniversaries. I will do milestones. So when I've sold certain amount, I was in a shop and I saw a pink and red bubble gun, very clear, not bubble gum. And I was like, that's really on brand. And I said to my husband at the time, that would be great for social media content. And he was like, nah. And I was like, yeah, I'm just to prove you wrong now, I'm going to buy it. And I filmed myself very straight faced being like, I get no reach on Instagram, but whatever. I've sold 10,000 copies of both my books. And that's the most viral reel. I say viral, it had like 22,000 views. So we're not talking millions here. I think you have to be millions technically to be viral, but
still very good.
Took me 10 seconds. I was really straight faced. I was laughing at myself. I was in like cycling shorts and scraped back hair. I was just like, whatever, but I've done it. So let's.
I did see that one, yeah.
And it went everywhere. And, for me, one of my values is to have fun. So I'm always trying to have these moments where I'm having fun with it. Like at the moment, I'm thinking about how could I dress up as a copy of the book. Or like I was thinking about like the physicality of it because it's just been Halloween. So I was thinking about like how I could actually do that. So yeah, it's just, to me, it's always just playing around with it. But, your audience also shares it. So it's also resharing what other people have said, sharing reviews, sharing testimonials, sharing your favorite bit, the bit that gets quoted to you the most. There's so many moments, but it's got to be that bit that makes you smile, makes you happy about it.
I love that so much. And you just casually drop in the conversation there that you sold 10,000 copies. Is that all together or each individual book?
No, I would love to say it's individual. No, it's over 10,000 units of both books.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, which I think there was a stat that something like most non-fiction books tend to only sell 300 copies in a lifetime.
Wow.
Or something, or even maybe it's like first year. So yeah, but back to the kind of Substack books, I always had this childhood dream of, I'm going to be a writer. And I remember one of my friends in publishing saying to me, I actually said to her, I'd love to move to France and be a writer. There's no money in that. Unless your husband earns loads of money, you can't have a career doing that. And now inadvertently, I think, well, I am a writer, just not in the way that I saw myself writing lots of fiction. I think that will be in my next decade. But I made more money in 1 year on Substack than I've made in 4 years of having books.
Wow.
So I made £25,000 in my first year of Substack.
Brilliant.
But Substack calls that like 45,000 GAR US dollars.
Yeah.
I'm like, we can talk about that another time. Whereas my books over 4 years, over 10,000 units is about £15,000. Plus, we've got to pay tax off of that as well.
Yeah. But that's still incredible, though. So many authors would never get anywhere near that. So that's a fantastic achievement. And was that all purely through just social media and your newsletter, or did you pay for any promotion in terms of that?
PR girl, I'm like, no, you got to turn that tap on and then do it for free. So yeah, for me, it was all free. Like I gave out lots of copies for free that I saw as a marketing cost. The ones that I hide in places, for me, that's obviously a marketing cost. So I bought 200 books, I think, when it came out at discount at the author rate, and do things. I have the box that I just do things with them. I used to sell my own copies through the website, signed as well. I used to take them to events. If I was doing keynote speaking, I'd have an iZettle on me and sell it from the event. Yeah, it was all pushing myself.
Yeah, fantastic. This is so good for anyone who has published a book or is going to publish a book, this kind of information, which I don't think is as readily available on the internet as we think it is. I think authors don't really talk about this enough because A, a lot of authors haven't achieved that sort of success with a book, and B, if they have achieved it, maybe they want to keep the information to themselves.
Yeah. I think the other thing is as well is that I was very honest about what I couldn't afford. So when my first book came out, I didn't have a sponsor or a big publisher. So I charged tickets for an event. And I had a drag queen because I am a big supporter of the queer community and I love drag queens. I wanted to have a drag queen at my party rather than just have KP nuts and some Merlot in a bookshop. So I was in freelancers studio space. I charged tickets, something like £5. It was nothing excessive. And for that, you had drinks and the drag queen show, or you could buy a ticket, which also included the price of the book. And I broke even. So every bit of ticket money went to paying for a DJ, paying for people to help on the door, paying for the drag queen, which was the most expensive part, paying for a photographer and the drinks. And I just sold tickets through Eventbrite. And it was, I remember at one point somebody was like, oh, you're making money off your own book launch. And I was like, no, this is how I'm covering the cost of my own book launch. And it didn't even really faze me that somebody might think that, because I just thought, well, if you really know me, you know I'm not there to profit off a book launch party. So I think it's important to have that moment for yourself as well, because if you birth a book, as you know, it's a painful experience as much as it's amazing. And actually, I find launch day itself really dissatisfying, because you're waiting for this big moment and it doesn't really, you're just sort of sat at home and maybe your phone's pinging a lot, but your life doesn't change. It's quite a weird...
Anticlimactic in some ways.
Yeah, really anticlimactic. So I feel like actually arranging a launch moment for yourself is a really important thing to do. With my second book, we were coming out of Panny D. So we just went out, me and Adrienne just went out for a nice dinner. So I still remember it. But afterwards I was like, oh, it would have been better to have done something with other people. But we were just coming out and it didn't feel the right time.
Yeah, that's amazing, Lucy. And I think it's so important, because so often we don't celebrate those milestones and those moments, and they just pass us by and then they're gone forever. I'm a big believer in, even if you do achieve something that other people might not think is that big a deal, that you should shout it from the rooftops and just put it out there and say, look, I did this by myself and I want to remember it. So if that could be in terms of your audience Substack, it could be in terms of a book, it could be in terms of a business, whatever it is, if you don't make a big deal out of it, it'll just come and go because somebody else will do it for you.
Yeah.
I don't think. I want to ask as well about this, kind of related to what we talked about already, but why do you think that solopreneurs and writers struggle so much to promote themselves? I think this is a major issue, because so many writers want to write, but when it comes to actually marketing what they write, that's a huge source of ick. They don't really want to do that sort of thing. You know what I mean? It's a big issue. And the best online writers I know are very, very good at marketing themselves, and we'll talk about how important it is. Why do you think it's such a big struggle for everybody else?
I'm going to blame it on the schools. No, I do think a part of it is the education piece, right? Because we think being creative is enough. And our ego wants us to go, oh, but our work will speak for itself. But the problem is, in the digital, there are hundreds and thousands of us whose work should be speaking for itself. And it is a bit unfair. I think some of the people who have some of the larger followings are actually quite mediocre at best, but they are just really good at promotion. And that isn't fair. It isn't fair. And that is actually part of what inspires me to do what I do, to push people to get themselves out there. Because if you are a writer or an artist or an author, you are a business. If that's how you want to make money, you are in business. You're in the business of yourself and your creative work. And most products and services do well because they spend so much money on branding and marketing and promotion. The actual product itself is sort of irrelevant in a way if you have the right branding and marketing. And I feel like people want to maybe give less than 10% of their time to promote. And I probably spend 80% of my time on promotion and 20% on the creation. I love promotion, but even I sometimes would rather just be on the creating side. That doesn't sell. And again, like, I don't have deep pockets. If I had millions in the bank, maybe I would just pay to advertise and take out billboards and posters, and I wouldn't need to be doing loads of podcasts and writing guest newsletters and all of posting on Notes every day and commenting on my readers. But actually for me, I do thrive off it and I do get that enjoyment from it. And I like to be able to walk my talk as well, to be like, this is
how you're doing it.
How I'm doing it. And when I say something like 80-20, that sounds extortionate, but like the actual time that I have to sit down and work is 2 afternoons a week. All the other times you're seeing me pop up on a daily basis. That's just me snatching like moments here or there. So I don't sit there and do 4 hours worth of promo. But I do habitually, I'll do a little bit every single day. And that obviously compounds. I don't take the weekends off. Like I'm still always on that treadmill. I think British people also, English people, are really excruciatingly bad at it. I think the Americans are so much better. For a start, the elevator pitch, like we don't even have the elevator, we have the lift. We're just not taught to walk in a room and say what we're great at. And the problem is, if you hate doing it and you introduce yourself in a room and you're hating how you're introducing yourself, then we are going to feel that as well. So that's why, again, I always come back to you've got to have the fun when you're doing it. An example of this, like I spoke to an author who said that she hated reading her fiction out loud at events. I was like, get a cameo, get an actress, get somebody else to do it. And I could see their mind being like, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. And I think, like, I saw this thing a while ago. It was funny, actually. I spoke with Sarah Fay and she asked me what my most popular note was. And I said, oh, it was one of those chronological ones where, like, in 2014, I was here in 20... And then Sarah Fay announced, like, this is how you go viral. And then I've noticed that everybody is now doing these notes where they in chronological order. And I'm like, no, but that's not original. So now you're going to feel maybe awkward doing that because you've seen everybody else do it. So just do it in the way that feels right. So I do like a weather watch on Instagram stories every day where I film what my garden looks like, what the weather is every day. People love it. It's not going to get me sales. It's not going to translate into me tipping over into 10,000 subscribers on Substack. But it's something that people just associate with me. And I always have this phrase called like showing a bit of ankle. So rather than you thinking, okay, I've got to share everything about myself, find what is your equivalent of your like horoscope and recipe pages. So for you, like I'm looking in the background and I'm like, you could tell us stories about what's on your bookshelf. There's the 2 cameras in the background. You've got, is that R2D2?
Yeah, BB, yeah,
exactly. So you've got stories there of like things that you're interested in, aside from your Substack. Immediately that there's a plant in the corner. Maybe you keep it alive. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's not. Like these are just little things that you can talk about that tell us a bit about who David is, but without it being everything. And if you think of like newspapers, you have news, you have the features, which are more trend-led pieces. Maybe it's looking at insights or analytics. And then you have the softer, fluffy bits. Or if you're watching TV news, it's the bit called, and finally. And for me, that's the bit that most people are missing. They're trying so hard to promote in the way they feel like everybody else is, that they've lost their bit. So I always get people to be like, what's your like horoscope and recipe pages that you can share that helps us to connect to you? It doesn't have to be about your work all the time.
I think for me, that's kind of like my dogs. I share a lot of stuff with my dogs all the time, like them wearing hats or when we take them out for a walk or they're doing something dumb around the house, because they're just always there. And that's just kind of like my, as you say, like horoscope.
You always do quite often do that are really popular on notes when you share a photo, like of where you've been or what you're doing.
Yeah.
Landscape. People love that, don't they?
Yeah, they do. I think you're right. Like just having that little bit of ankle, as you say. You're not going too deep. You're not like sharing some major vulnerability. You're just giving a bit of an insight into your real life. I've actually talked to a lot of creators about this recently, about the balance between talking about yourself and providing value in terms of the notes and stuff that you put out. And if you do one or the other, like heavily, it's going to be too much and the scales are going to tip the wrong way. If you constantly talk about yourself just as a person and you show too much of that vulnerability and too much about yourself, you lose the sense of authority that you might have in your niche. Whereas if you only talk about your niche and you only provide value constantly, then people forget you're a real human being, and then it's very hard to connect with you on that level. And you've confirmed that what you've been saying here today, which is great. And Lucy, this is brilliant, by the way. It's really, really good conversation. Thanks for this.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no, the stuff you're sharing is fantastic. It really is. It's so important, I think, because writers are really bad at this. And even what you were saying about how we struggle to talk about our books, I am majorly bad in real life situations at talking about what I do. I really struggle with it. I'm really naturally introverted. So my wife and I were at a party recently and someone said, "What do you do?" And then it just was like this sense of dread just washed over me. And it shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be like that. And it's not always like that, but just in those moments, you're like, oh no, I was trying to explain what I do. And then if someone says, "What's your book about?" You're like, oh no, I'll talk about my book now. And this is even worse. And That's just a mindset problem that I have. And that's something obviously that you work on with people.
Yeah. Maybe you need to take your book on a walking tour. And for a week, you could just do like a kind of Where's Wally with your book in the photo. Can you see your book in there?
Yeah,
Just
that's a good idea.
take one of your books on tour.
I might try that. Anything at all can help me get better talking about it would be great.
You don't even have to say anything. You could just show your landscape and the book could just always be there in the background.
Yeah, we try and spot it. Something I actually find is really useful is I get, and you mentioned this as well, is getting other people to talk about it. So I give a lot of free advanced reader copies out on TikTok because people on TikTok are great at making videos, obviously, and they're very comfortable with that, and they can make really engaging, funny stuff a lot of the time. Like someone made a video the other day that kind of was like a summation of my book, and it was hilarious, and it was really good and really, really good content that I can share. So sometimes getting somebody else, like you mentioned about getting an actor to read out your book, like an excerpt, getting somebody else that is more comfortable is a better way than trying to force yourself sometimes if you're not necessarily comfortable with that. But yeah, I think that's really important. And just about that, if you had to sum this up in 3 suggestions for people, for writers and creators who want to promote themselves without feeling that sense of ick, or like comfortableness, what would you say are like the top 3 things you'd suggest for that?
Yeah, so I would say definitely like the gifting thing is a great thing with books. And actually a lot of it is in the pitch. And it feels so much worse to you writing the pitch, maybe to the person on the other side. I can really tell if somebody knows me versus I'm on a list. Because I am on a few PR lists for books sometimes. Versus somebody who goes, oh, I know you're interested in talking about like creativity or solopreneurship, or you've just moved to France. Would you be interested in this book where this person moves location? When somebody gives a bit of a nugget that's related to what I talk about, and I can tell they know me, it makes me more interested in sharing. And I don't have a ridiculous amount of followers. I do think nano followers do tend to work well. And I do think video does work really well, like you were saying. When my first book, I tried really hard with like big name people, and actually a few of them did do it and it didn't really do anything. Whereas there were other people who had less than 3,000, 4,000 followers, but when they spoke about it, I could see the line on Amazon Author Central going up because they were a direct audience match. So I do think it's like keeping your ego in check. And I know I've said this before and I maybe sound like a broken record, but it's not about the people with big numbers. It's about the people with the right audience match. And that's why I don't try to go viral or I don't try to get big, because I'm like, I don't want to get trolled. I want to just hit my target audience. And that is 100% fine. So finding your geeks in their niche who love what you love, who talk about what it is that you write about is great. Tip number 2, I would say play to your strengths. So if you're a writer, you're probably going to like writing. So maybe pitching for written interviews. If you're an extrovert, you might like doing podcasts, you might like speaking. I do think in-person events work really well to convert sales. And that could be on a video podcast. It could be hosting an online event. Play to what it is that you feel good about doing. I see so many people getting hung up with traditional press coverage. And really, a mention in the newspaper is great, but unless it's a full page or a double page spread about you, it's unlikely to move the dial for sales. You're actually much better off guest writing for somebody on Substack or being on somebody's podcast than you are spending days trying to get one small excerpt in the Times. So I would definitely like refocus to, if your goal is to sell copies, then go for what's going to sell the copies in a way that's good for you. And then I think lastly, but not least, it's keep some gas in the tank. Like we all rush and put all this pressure on ourselves for launch day. There's so many books that didn't do well in the first week. And of course, if you want to be like a New York Times bestseller or a Sunday Times bestseller, launch week is the best time to try and attempt to get into those lists. But the reality is for a lot of us, we're not going for numbers like that. We're going for longevity. So take your time with it. Pick some moments. Like, could you do a bit of a regional tour? Could you tie in? I'm going to London at the end of January for work. So I'm thinking about what else can I tie in at the same time? So are you going on holiday somewhere? Are you booked to do a workshop or a talk somewhere else? Are you visiting family and friends in another city? And can you tie in some activity around your book at the same time? So find some moments throughout the year to diarize publication moments for you, like promotional moments for your publication.
Excellent. Yeah, fantastic advice. And I'm so practical as well on things we don't really think about all the time as writers and creators.
My bonus one would be to write down your values. Like not all, you can write all of them, but have 5. Yeah. And then don't work with anybody that doesn't align with them. Because people, especially like creators as well, they're like, oh, this person who's got 100,000 followers has asked me to be on their podcast. And you're like, yeah, but do you actually align with what they're saying? And like the other day I was invited by actually a really big name from Medium who's over here. And their whole premise is about teaching creators how to get paid. And they wanted me to teach a workshop, but they weren't going to pay me. Okay. And I was like, but your whole thing is teaching people, your whole ethos is teaching creators how to get paid, and you're not paying your creators. Yeah. But that's an absolute lie. And for me, every expert I work with, I pay. So if you're teaching your expertise to help somebody else make money, you should be getting paid for that.
Good point. No, that's very fair. Yeah, I think a lot of time we just expect to be able to have people do things for free, and like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing, but we should get paid for what we do. Is the kind of point of trying to create a writer-based business. Yeah. Actually get income from it, and everything isn't free. I think sometimes people do abuse that a little bit. There are definitely bigger companies and bigger outlets that would just expect things for free and would prey on smaller creators and smaller writers, and just they think they're going to get exposure for it, but that doesn't pay the bills. You know what I mean?
Especially if it's businesses or entities who are talking about how much money you can get made as a creator, then I'm like, okay, you can't sit there in one breath and say how much money you make and then not pay your experts.
Exactly. In terms of what you're doing in the future, then, what are your plans then? Do you have any big plans for the next sort of few years, or what do you think?
So I do need to be a little bit mindful of my current life. So I am trying to learn French. So I am a French student. I do have 3 children under the age of 7. We have a lot more holidays here in France than we do in the UK. And I am now the primary caregiver. Quite often the only solo caregiver, because quite often my husband has to travel. So I do have to be realistic with what I can do in 2 afternoons a week. Historically, as I launched the Substack, I was still teaching a lot and doing a lot of brand work. But in 2025, I'm actually going to go all in on the newsletter. I really want to be top 10 in business. I'm currently in top 50. I would love to be a 6-figure newsletter business. Heck, I'd love to be a 7-figure newsletter business, but we shall see. I mean, ultimately, I want to be like the best supportive newsletter for helping people get themselves out there. And at a certain point, I won't be able to do that on my own, because right now I try and speak to everybody individually. And if sometimes I'm like, actually, maybe I do just want to keep it small, because then I know everybody and I can speak to everybody. But I do want to find a way to scale it slowly in a way that I can still support the audience that are there, but just help as many independents get themselves out there. That's the goal, really.
Yeah, and what a great goal that is as well. And thank goodness you're on Substack as well, because you are one of the best people at that. Like, you're one of the first people that came across on Substack when I first joined it, and I've seen your stuff when it comes up. But yeah, and let's see, how do people find you then? So is Substack the best place? Is that like your kind of main focal point?
Yeah, I would say so. So on Substack, it's hypeyourself.substack.com. On all other social media channels, it's Lucy Werner PR. So yeah, Instagram, I'm fairly active on, and LinkedIn. Yeah.
Brilliant. Amazing. I just want to finish with one question. I didn't actually tell this in advance, but this is what I always ask everybody who's on the podcast. If you had one golden nugget of advice for people who want to make a living from their writing, what would it be?
Write it. It sounds a bit obvious, but share it. Don't keep it to yourself. And I would also say, one piece of advice I heard when I got started was, get your friends and family to come and support you. I'm actually really anti that, because your friends and family, they're not necessarily your ideal reader. Play where your ideal readers play. Go and hang out there, and try not to let other people in your life have too much of a look in, because then I think it does inhibit you from writing. And actually, my favorite thing to do is find people with less than 100 subscribers on Substack, because they write in such an uninhibited way, because they're so free. And I think once you do get to a certain size, it can be hard to stay that way. So try and almost write like no one's reading, but
Yeah.
then promote it.
Yeah, then promote it. Perfect. Good way to finish in terms of what we talked about today. But yeah, Lucy, thanks so much. Great to have you here. Really enjoyed this chat. So useful for anybody who does want to promote themselves as a writer or as a creator. I think you've given us great action points, and you've also been able to back that up with what you're doing as well. So yeah, everybody who's listening or watching this later, please go and check out Lucy on Substack and on social media, and definitely subscribe to her newsletter, thing that she's doing. And yeah, Lucy, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey friend, thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you enjoyed it, or if you enjoyed any previous episodes of the How to Write for a Living podcast, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast episodes. Don't forget, you can also subscribe to my mailing list on Substack on How to Write for a Living. It'd be great to see you there as well. But definitely make sure you check out all previous episodes of the podcast. Give them a listen. It'll be well worth your time, and I'm sure you'll enjoy them. Don't forget to subscribe here and on Substack, and I will see you again really soon. Thanks for listening.